I've never considered myself part of the MAGA movement, but as I'm sure many of you have experienced as well, I've had friends, family, and neighbors who absolutely are or were part of MAGA at some point. And over the past decade or so, I've tried to understand why. Why are so many people drawn to MAGA?
What year was America great?
When it was founded.
Except for the slavery stuff.
Except for the slavery stuff.
Well, after years of conversations and observation, I think I've pinpointed a few key reasons. Ideas that deserve more discussion among those of us outside the MAGA coalition, which I'm assuming includes most of you watching this. So today I want to break down 4 main ideas that I think most moderates and left-leaning voters can actually agree with MAGA on. Hey, it's been a minute, and here's what MAGA actually gets right. Before we get started, I do want to add a little bit of context to this video before you start typing out that I've fallen down the alt-right pipeline and that I'm just a far-right grifter now. So I have a couple disclaimers. Disclaimer number 1. I'm going to be breaking down what MAGA gets right, not what Trump gets right. This distinction is very intentional because there actually isn't much of anything that I feel Trump gets right. And when you think about that, it's genuinely sort of remarkable. I mean, with the amount of scattershot spew policy that emerges from this administration on a daily basis, you would think that there would be at least 1 or 2 ideas hiding in the morass of muck. But no. It's all bad. But with that being said, I do think it's important to clarify something about Trump, which is I don't really think he stands for anything. I view Trump as sort of an empty vessel, a useful idiot. I don't really think he has precepts or values other than perhaps a vague cocaine-addled Charlie Sheen conception of winning. Because of this, the policies produced by this administration are almost entirely a product of the people he surrounds himself with. It's one reason that Trump exists in a near constant state of contradiction, claiming to be the president of peace while actively funding genocide in Palestine and Yemen, claiming to be a champion for American workers, and then outsourcing 200,000 jobs in the first term alone, claiming that he's not a pedophile, and then writing this. Basically, whatever comes out of Trump's mouth can be directly traced back to the last person who had his bullet-ridden ear. And unfortunately, at the moment, that group mostly consists of a bunch of weirdo, imperialist, paleo-conservatives bent on turning Charlie Kirk into MLK. Disclaimer number 2. Please don't mistake this video as my endorsement of the MAGA movement as a whole. There are so many strains of MAGA ideology that I find repulsive. The contemptible xenophobia, the blatant disregard for and abandonment of science and education.
I wasn't aware he said it, but I think I agree with it.
You agree with it? It's not true.
The hypocritical Christian evangelicalism, which by the way will never stop being funny. MAGA full-throatedly supports a man who just so painfully obviously does not give a f about Jesus.
Wondering what 1 or 2 of your most favored Bible verses are and why.
I wouldn't want to get into it because to me that's very personal. You know, when I talk about the Bible, it's very personal, so I don't want to get into verses. I don't want to get into...
There's no verse that means a lot to you that you think about or cite?
The Bible means a lot to me.
But with that being said, there are things about the MAGA movement that I do find commonality with. And I do think it's actually really important not to just write off every single person who voted differently than you. So, let's dive into it. For the next time you're at your drunk, mildly racist Uncle Larry's hunting cabin, here's a list of 4 things MAGA actually gets right. It's a big club, and we ain't in it. Look, I'm gonna be the first person on the left side of YouTube to say this, but that Karl Marx guy actually got a few things right. And one of those things that I think Marx fundamentally got right is that essentially, when you boil down to it, there really are just 2 classes. A proletariat and a bourgeoisie. A working class and an owning class. A 1% and a 99.9%. The statistics actually bear this out, by the way. It's simply a fact that the 3 richest men in America, Zuck, Bezos, and Elon, have more wealth than the bottom 90% of Americans. Think for a second about how absurd that is. They own not just more than America's poor, but the bottom 90%. That encompasses the doctors, lawyers, tech bros, pharmacists, dentists, pilots, product managers, whatever the fuck they do. All of their combined wealth, all eclipsed by 3 money-hungry dweebs. And Americans know this too. Around 70% of Americans say that the economy is rigged to benefit wealthy and powerful, including a whopping 60% of lower-income Republicans, a group that voted en masse for our billionaire bozo president in 2024. But perhaps the best way to get definitive proof about the profound distrust of elites in the MAGA movement is to simply ask them about their favorite guy, Jeffrey Epstein.
The Epstein files?
Epstein Island.
The Epstein files.
Epstein.
You still talking about Jeffrey Epstein?
Seriously, nothing on earth seems to rile up the MAGA movement more than the mention of Jeffrey and his little island. And there does seem to be a particular emphasis on anti-elitism when they talk about it. There's a very common and shared acknowledgement that the Epstein Island was a place for elites. A place that they and others like them could never possibly travel to. Reserved for a cabal of perverted pedophile aristocrats. And the thing is they're not totally wrong. It's just that their misconception that Trump couldn't have been a part of that cabal is sort of confounding.
I didn't know that he spent a lot of time with Trump.
Since, there is literally a treasure trove of evidence that Trump and Epstein were very much in cahoots. Like, I don't know, this picture of Epstein holding a check from Trump that suggests that he literally bought a woman for $50,000. But as you'll see throughout this video, a recurring theme is that while MAGA often has the spirit, they can't really identify the problems. They're not always the best at articulating why something is a problem. Which brings us to freedom isn't free. MAGA influencers love to scream that free speech is under attack, usually while live streaming from their basement while they attempt to hawk totally legit supplements that deliver real and proven results. Oh wait, that reminds me. I gotta do an ad read. Let's face it, after a night of drinks, I don't bounce back the next day like I used to. I'm getting a little old. And I have to make a choice. I can either have a great night, or I can have a great next day. That is, until I found pre-alcohol. Z-Biotics Pre-Alcohol is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you're gonna feel your best tomorrow. I don't really deal with those rough mornings anymore, and honestly, it's been a game changer. With the holidays right around the corner, pre-alcohol can help you enjoy the celebrations while still feeling your best the next day. Just hit the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to get 15% off your first order, plus free shipping. And the best part, Z-Biotics has a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're not into it for any reason, they'll refund you, no questions asked. And a huge thank you to Z-Biotics for sponsoring this video. And look, again, MAGA is not entirely wrong. Free speech is under attack. For instance, just the other week, the Trump administration sent out a fun little email blast to some of our nation's most prestigious intellectual institutions, urging campus leaders to sign a loyalty test, termed the Compact for Excellence in Higher Education, in order to ensure greater access to federal dollars. And what's in this compact? Oh, just a casual list of demands that reads like it was drafted by Charlie Kirk after binge-watching PragerU videos on 2x speed. Ban transgender students from sports and bathrooms that match their gender identity. Cap international student enrollment at 15%. Eliminate race, sex, and gender identity from admissions and hiring. Force professors to be institutionally neutral on political issues. Report foreign students to Homeland Security if they seem hostile to American values. Teach civics to international students so they can learn how great America is. So basically just bald-faced blackmail from our federal government to block free speech in our education system. No biggie. But if higher education doesn't wet MAGA's whistle, maybe we can turn to a topic a bit more lowbrow. Our fallen angel, Jimmy Kimmel. Look, if you're like me, you don't exactly view Kimmel monologues as being a bellwether for what you can and can't say in America. This man has basically been held hostage by the Disney Corporation for like 15 years. Every night, wheeled out onto stage like Weekend at Bernie's, forced to read jokes about how Trump is orange and how Matt Damon is still ducking him. But you can't just yank him off the air because he made a few jokes on Trump's reaction after Charlie Kirk's passing.
Condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House.
But come on, that's genuinely a hilarious reaction. Kimmel would be abdicating his responsibility as a late-night host if he didn't play that clip. By the way, the only reason Kimmel even got briefly canned was because ABC's parent company desperately wanted to appease FCC chairman and MAGA whisperer Brendan Carr so they could get a merger approved, which is a perfect encapsulation of how politics actually work in this country. The point is that freedom of speech is supposed to exist for everyone in America, even the aggressively unfunny like Kimmel. And when we have government flunkies like Carr flexing their power like a shit Sopranos mafiosa and pulling people off television for jokes, that's actually an attack on freedom of speech, even if it's kind of stupid. And look, the MAGA movement doesn't just distrust the media, it distrusts everything. They basically live by the motto that if it isn't from Truth Social or from Gunther Eagleman or Cat Turd on Twitter, then that means it's from the deep state. The courts, the FBI, the CDC, the Pentagon, the Weather Report on CNN. None of these institutions have the trust of the MAGA base. And unfortunately, there's a really good reason for that. Over the last 50 years, Americans have witnessed one scandal after another, and we've started to wonder if the coke-fueled Patrick Bateman cosplayers on Wall Street, the anti-Semitic ultra-paranoid men inhabiting the White House, the shadowy surveillance-obsessed directors of government agencies, and the board members of companies that literally build missiles that blow up children all over the world may not have the average American's best interest at heart. A healthy distrust in our political, healthcare, and financial institutions is a good thing. We're talking about the United States government here. You may know us from the Pentagon Papers, the report that highlighted Lyndon B. Johnson's knowledge of our atrocities and dishonesty about the scope and motives of the Vietnam War. Or maybe you're more familiar with the FDA's willful inaction during the 1980s AIDS epidemic, during which over 40,000 Americans died before our governmental agencies even started to mount a real response. And what about our pals down on Wall Street, whose lobbying for less banking regulations has brought us depressions, recessions, Enrons, Madoffs, and a whole team of grifters that have robbed us blind in the name of profits for the entirety of the American experiment? And I failed to mention that America was founded by capitalists who amassed their fortunes through slave labor, our government breaking literally every treaty we've ever made with Native Americans while committing a not-so-subtle genocide, and our apolitical Supreme Court that includes Clarence fucking Thomas. So while MAGA has chosen some strange vessels for their anti-establishment messaging, the message itself has some serious cankles to stand on. So now let's look at a few more recent examples of institutional failures that put the icing on top of this conspiratorial pie we've been baking.
What are your plans for cleaning up our environment?
9/11.
After the attacks on the World Trade Center in 2001, we actually saw Americans' confidence in the office of the presidency spike to levels we didn't see in the previous 30 years and haven't seen since. But this momentary national unifier was followed by a steep decline in confidence that we've never been able to recover. Americans and the rest of the free world declared a global war on terror, something the whole family could get behind. We got to test out every new toy our defense budget spawned, on villains with names we couldn't pronounce, in places we couldn't point out on a globe, rolling tanks across countries that we were told were harboring terrorists and weapons of mass destruction really boosted the country's self-esteem after a messy 8-year relationship with a president whose saxophone skills blinded us from his lies about his sexual proclivities and drug use. "I've never broken a state law," he said in a candidates forum, "but when I was in England, I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it. I didn't inhale it, and I never tried it again."
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
He did. He definitely did. Of course, if you watch my video that I posted in September, then you remember how this story ended. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There was seemingly no way to end this conflict that we started in the Middle East. And there was certainly no path to what anyone could call a victory. A new generation of Americans, temporarily unified by a common enemy, were left permanently scarred by the government's deceit that still lingers in the back of our TikTok-addled brains today. But it wasn't just the wars in the Middle East.
It was the worst day on Wall Street since the crash of 1987.
Picture this. It's 2007. We're still at war. George Bush's image hasn't been rehabilitated by his friendship with Michelle Obama or his new paint-by-numbers hobby. There's a brewing global recession that will be exacerbated by the collapse of the United States housing bubble. Democrats actually find a politician that doesn't send a chill down the spine of the majority of Americans.
I stand before you today to announce my candidacy for President of the United States of America.
He's young, he's bright, he's got a command of the English language that we hadn't seen in 8 years and certainly haven't seen since. Obama. The vibes were immaculate. America chose to elect an intellectual after 8 years of anti-intellectualism. We chose to elect a black man after decades of racist dog whistling. We chose to elect the candidate of change in face of the status quo that hadn't worked for the average American in 50 years. It all sounded really promising, but unfortunately, there wasn't as much change as Americans were originally hoping for. The wars continued to rage in the Middle East. Barack Obama used drone strikes like Joe Biden and Donald Trump used their adult diapers, with shocking frequency and no regard for collateral damage. The number of people deported rose to over 3 million during the 8 years of Obama leadership. The promise of single-payer healthcare was artfully negotiated down to what would become the Affordable Care Act by, well, the president and the Democratic congressional leaders themselves. So what about those assholes on Wall Street? Bush's last dance of his presidency was the signing of TARP bailouts that the very companies who started this shit show would use to pay their executives huge bonuses. Barack Obama's passage of the Dodd-Frank Act was meant to provide some oversight of Wall Street and reform the national financial sector, but the damage was already done. Millions of Americans had lost their life savings, their jobs, their dignity, and their trust in the bankers who turned crooks who conned them. Another institution, this one financial, that Americans used to be able to take at face value, collapsed right before their eyes. First, our government lied to us about why they started a forever war in the Middle East. Then they told us change was coming. And it did, in the form of drone strikes and deportations. And then they took our money and gave bonuses to criminals who abused our trust. After these seminal events of the 2000s, with Americans' trust in our political and financial institutions bottoming out with no real chance of recovery anytime soon, the MAGA movement, with Donald Trump chief among them, has turned our perfectly reasonable distrust of the powers that be into a weapon to get power, retain power, and make himself and his cronies the chief authority on everything. Over the last 10 years, we've been blitzed with insane claims about wind turbines causing cancer, horse dewormer and bleach during COVID-19, and federal elections being stolen by an unseen cabal. Of course, none of it is true, but it is politically expedient to flood the zone with bullshit and let the opposition try to correct you. They can't. There's too much misinformation. There's too much distractions. And when someone refutes their statements with what we used to call facts, MAGA looks at the American people and says, "Really? You're gonna trust these guys? The generals who made up phony stories to get us into Iraq? The editorial boards of news organizations that gave their full-fledged support for war? The corporate hacks who fired you, bankrupted you, and then took what was left of your tax dollars and paid themselves?" And America's resounding answer is, hell no, we don't trust them. And how could you blame them? The American people have been scammed, conned, taken for a ride, and had the wool pulled over our eyes. It's only natural that we're looking for a way out, an outsider who will fight for us against institutions who have done nothing but lie to us. But we picked the wrong one. At the start of this video, I listed off a whole bunch of things that the MAGA movement stands for that I really disagree with. But as I've gone on, I'm starting to realize that I actually agree with what a lot of the MAGA movement stands against. You see, MAGA really starts to make sense when you think about it as an opposition movement. It sort of goes back to what I was talking about in the intro, about how Trump is just sort of an empty vessel. And in a way that works. Because MAGA can take that vessel and pour all their fears and feelings of betrayal and distrust into it. They may not know what Donald Trump is, but they know what he isn't. And the one thing that he isn't is a no-good, sneaky, woke, holier-than-thou lib. If there's one thing that Donald is not, it's a Democrat. And look, I can't blame MAGA folks for thinking this way. Look at the chief Democrat rivals Trump has faced off within his tenure. Crooked Hillary, the human embodiment of establishment politics as usual, the biggest alligator in the swamp, who throughout her decades in politics radically changed her positions on core issues, ranging from same-sex marriage, to trade, to immigration, to foreign policy, to healthcare. Or how about Sleepy Joe, a geriatric relic of a bygone era? A man whose cognitive function was diminishing at such a pace that his syntax often made Trump's look organized.
This guy, when he was president, he said he had every week, we're gonna have infrastructure week.
A both-sidester who criticized the Trump tariffs on the election trail and then kept them all in place? And who now? Kamala, Pete, Gavin, McKinsey consultants and former tough-on-crime attorney generals and schmoozy wine merchants? The Democrats' party and its leaders do not represent the interests of common Americans. And even if not every member of the MAGA movement is the brightest bulb in the chandelier, people have intuition. They understand when they're getting f***ed. They understand when people can't be trusted. I made this video because I want people in America who have voted for Donald Trump to know that they're not the enemy. In a lot of ways, they're right. It is us versus them. But us versus them doesn't mean America versus immigrants or America versus woke. It means understanding that as part of the 99.9%, we share collective interests. We can have good jobs and schools and healthcare and happy families. But it requires that we listen to one another and understand that we're on the same team. Well, mostly on the same team. These assholes. And MAGA, if you are watching this video and have watched to the end, wake the fuck up. Nobody that you've ever voted for cares about you. We need to start lifting up politicians and leaders who actually care about the majority of Americans, who actually want to pass policies that benefit the working class. I don't care what party they're part of. And even though a lot of them in America have found a home within the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party doesn't even like them. And I think that says a lot. This isn't a sport. This isn't your team. Wake the fuck up and vote for people that actually give a shit about you. So what are your thoughts? I know this might be a little bit of a controversial video, so I want to know what you're thinking too. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to the channel, and if you want to support the channel financially and also get access to videos before they release on YouTube, consider joining my Patreon. All the Patreon memberships goes directly to funding this channel, which is great because I get to make the videos better every single time. Hopefully. Anyway, it's been a minute, and thank you so much for watching.